Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We can resume now. Yes. So we're going over the 5 conditions for an authentic hadith. And we went over the condition that the chain must be connected, and the second one, which was that the narrators must all be trustworthy. Now we move to the third one. Sorry, let me just do something. It's quite windy here in Walmer Estate, and the door keeps on moving because of the wind. Yes, so now we're going to continue with the third one. All the narrators must be accurate in the transmission of the report. There's 2 types of dabt, accuracy. The word dabt translates to being accurate in your narration, in your transmission of the report. Now, this dabt, this accuracy can be divided into 2. There's 2 types of them. Dabt, sadr. Sadr in Arabic means chest. In other words, if you translate that literally to mean the accuracy of your chest. But what is meant by that is that you have a good memory. This is accuracy of the heart, such that when one hears a hadith, they remember it perfectly and narrate it in its exact form. This type of accuracy requires good memory. So, having a good memory, essentially. This is what this type of dabt means, having a good memory. And then the second type of dabt is dabt kitab. And the word kitab means book. This is accuracy of the book, such that if someone writes down a hadith when they hear it on a book, they should preserve the book and make sure no one gets access to the book and change the wording and meaning of the hadith in it. So there's one accuracy of your memory, and there's another accuracy of preserving the books where you write down the reports of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all the narrators, and yes, Auntie Sihan. Oh, okay. Okay. So all the narrators must be accurate in the transmission of the hadith. The 4th condition for an authentic hadith is the absence of any anomalies, shudud. A shadh hadith is one where a trustworthy narrator contradicts a more trustworthy narrator or a group of accepted narrators. Once the hadith is verified to have a connected chain and all its narrators trustworthy and accurate, meaning that we have been going over the conditions one by one. So we started off by checking the hadith or the chain to be connected, being connected. And we ticked that box. And then the second condition, we checked whether all the narrators were trustworthy. And we ticked that box. The third one was that all the narrators are accurate. We ticked this box. Now we're on the 4th box. Now, it is possible that you've ticked the first 3 boxes, but then a problem arises in the 4th box. There is still the possibility when one of the trustworthy and accurate narrators articulated something that is contrary to what another more accurate narrator said. If this is the case, the hadith will be judged to have an anomaly, hence not sahih. To identify an anomaly, the scholar of hadith should collect as many chains of narrations of a given text of hadith and cross-examine those narrations and texts. Now, here's an important idea. In the first 3 conditions, we're looking at one chain of narration. We're looking at one sanad from someone, from another person, from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we checked whether this one narration, we checked whether this one sanad is connected we checked whether every single individual within the chain was trustworthy and accurate. Now, when it comes to checking whether now this hadith has a shadda or has a anomaly within it, you have to search for other chains of narrations for the same hadith. In the first three conditions, we're restricting ourselves to one chain, to the primary chain. But now when it comes to the fourth condition, we need to search for secondary chains or other chains. And then we need to start now comparing our first chain with those other chains and the method that arises from our primary chain from the method that arises from the other chains. And once we notice, for example, that many of the other chains say one thing in the hadith, while in our primary chain, it says something slightly different, but contradictory to what the other chains say in the matan, then we will say that despite our chain being connected, our primary chain being connected, despite all the narrators being accurate and trustworthy, maybe one of the narrators made a slight mistake. And we have an indication to this mistake because this chain is differing with either a group of accepted narrators or is differing with a more trustworthy narrator, a mutqin, a narrator who is very meticulous in his transmission of a hadith. And in this way, we can see that this quality is a relational quality. It is a quality of the chain of hadith that arises from cross-examining other chains of a hadith. It is not something within one chain of hadith, but this quality only arises in relation to other chains of a hadith. So that gives us a good idea of what Adam Shudud means. And then the last one is Adam al-Ilal. Now you might think that an anomaly and a defect are similar things. They sound quite similar. However, just to explain this idea over here, all the apparent qualities of a hadith could indicate to its authenticity, which means that we've now ticked the first 4 boxes for a particular chain and hadith. However, there could lie hidden within the chain or method a defect that can only be identified by the masters of this science. This hidden defect is called a illah. Only those scholars who have exposed themselves to tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands of ahadith can tell whether a particular narration, whether in the chain or in the matan, has a defect in it. You know, it's like they've seen so many ahadith and they've become so accustomed to the way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaks and to the way the chains of narrations have been constructed that they can tell that no, there's something wrong here. And in fact, Imam al-Nawawi mentions that it is even possible for one of these masters of ulum al-hadith to say that there's an illah in this hadith, but not be able to explain where the illah lies. It's almost like they have an instinct within them that indicates to them there's something wrong here, but they might not be able to explain it to you or to identify exactly where the defect lies. And because of how difficult it is to identify a illah, and that it's normally exclusively for the experts and masters of this science, I will leave this condition here, inshallah. Only after meeting these aforementioned conditions will an ahad hadith be deemed sahih. So just going back to a few slides previously, we mentioned that there's 2 types of ahadith, a mutawatir hadith and a ahad hadith. A mutawatir hadith is one where it has been massively transmitted, a mass transmitted hadith. Many people have transmitted it. And because so many people have transmitted it, it's nearly impossible for it to not be true. we automatically accept it and say that it is firmly established in the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the ahad hadith is one where a few narrators have narrated it. So for a mutawatir hadith, once you conclude that a hadith is mutawatir, you automatically say it's authentic. But for a ahad hadith, once you see that a hadith is ahad, you cannot make that automatic jump. You cannot say automatically it's authentic. You have to make this hadith undergo a test. And that test, as we mentioned, were those 5 conditions. So once a ahad hadith undergoes these aforementioned 5 conditions, then we are going to say that it is authentic, it is sahih. And going back again to the very beginning of this presentation, when we were thinking of Imam al-Bukhari, Imam al-Bukhari would only include a sahih hadith in his book, Sahih al-Bukhari, which means that when he came across a hadith, he had to first ask himself, is this sahih or not? And from what we've seen now, that those the criterion that he used in telling a hadith, a sahih hadith from a non-sahih hadith, were those 5 conditions. And once a particular hadith, once the hadith in front of him fulfilled all those 5 conditions, he would say that this is sahih and he would include it in his book. That's where now we get a hadith like إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Yes. Now, I would like us to think of those 5 conditions a bit more. Where to go to find out if a hadith meets the 5 conditions of authenticity. Okay, so let's say we have a particular hadith in front of us. And we know that we need to check whether this hadith fulfills the 5 conditions for an authentic hadith. The first condition being ittisal sanad, that the chain is connected. And what is meant by the chain is connected is that each narrator must have been a contemporary and must have met and must have heard that particular hadith directly from the person that they're narrating from. Which means that we need to know the biographies of each narrator. Which means that if you want to check whether a hadith is muttasil, has ittisal sanad, its chain is connected, we need to go to those works that have been authored that give us biographical entries on all narrators. And that subject, we could call that subject ilm al-rijal. Al-rijal means men, but the ilm al-rijal is a subset of ulum al-hadith that looks into the biographies of each narrator. So, for example, it will tell us the name of a narrator, and when they were born, when they passed away, who they narrated from, who they narrated to, and whether they were relied upon, whether they could be considered a relied upon narrator, and those kinds of things. Ittisal sanad. So for ittisal sanad, you check whether a given narrator was alive when the person that he narrated from was alive also. So you have to check their birth, the date of birth, the date of death, and those kinds of things. And another helpful thing would be to see who they narrated from. Yeah. So ilm al-rijal. So you go to ilm al-rijal. And then if you want to check the integrity of a narrator, thubut al-adala, you go to ilm al-rijal, the books, those same books, the same books as this one, but normally within the biographical entry of a narrator, they will either praise the narrator or critique the narrator. And the science that focuses on praising or critiquing the integrity and the accuracy of narrators is called ilm al-jarh wa ta'adil. So over here, ilm al-jarh wa ta'adil. The science, al-jarh means to critique someone, to criticize a narrator, and wa ta'adil from the word adal, thubut al-adala, means to praise the integrity, to praise the character. So within the biographical entries of narrators, you will find maybe a scholar saying that this narrator was a thiqa, He was a relied upon narrator, or this narrator is a good narrator, saduq. Maybe this narrator was a sheikh, and the word sheikh normally in hadith means that he was a good narrator, but due to old age, he started to lose his memory. Or then sometimes you might get other descriptions like kadhab, that this person was he persistently used to lie. For thubut al-adala, we go to ilm jarh wa ta'dil and ilm al-rijal. And I'll give you examples, I'll give you a brief example in a short while, inshallah. Then thubut al-dabt, in verifying the accuracy of the narrator, you do the same thing with thubut al-adala. You go to the same books. Yeah. In fact, sometimes they might describe a narrator with one word, and this one word indicates to both his integrity and his accuracy, like the word thiqa. The word thiqa means that this narrator was someone of taqwa and of God consciousness, and at the same time was also an accurate narrator. So you still go to the same books to check whether a narrator had the dabt, accuracy. Then the fourth condition, or adam shudud, as mentioned previously, a shadda, the quality or an anomaly is a relational quality. It's a quality that arises in relation to other chains of narrations. So that means that you need to now search for other chains of narrations for the same hadith, or for the same content of the hadith. And this activity, the activity of collecting as many chains of narration of a particular hadith, is called in Arabic tatabbu'ut turuq. Tatabbu'ut turuq, like to follow for the different chains of narration, or to gather the many chains of narration. So that the activity is called tatabbu'ut turuq, while the science that teaches us how to do tatabbu'ut turuq is takhrijul hadith. So you have tatabbu'ut turuq, which is the process of gathering as many narrations as possible, while takhrijul hadith is the science that tells us, okay, if you want to find as many chains of narrations for a particular hadith, this is what you do. And in fact, takhrijul hadith is so interesting to the point that you could, if you study this subject properly, and someone tells you, for example, a hadith in English, someone tells you, for example, that I know there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that you should love for your brother, that no one will believe until they love for their brother what they love for themselves. So someone is telling you the hadith in English. You can find as many chains of narration and as many versions of the content of this hadith thanks to takhrij al-hadith. Because what you'll do is that you'll translate the hadith into Arabic. Okay, I know this means لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. And then you will find different books that show you how to collect as many chains. So for example, some books might arrange the matan of a hadith in alphabetic order. So since this hadith starts off by saying لا يؤمن, you would go to a particular book and then you check lam, alif, la, then you look at ya, yu'minu, ya with the wow that has a hamza on top of it, la yu'minu, mim, nun, and then you'll find the hadith, la yu'minu ahadukum hatta yuhibba li akhi ma yuhibbu li nafsi, and then it will tell you, okay, you'll find this hadith in Sahih Bukhari, this chapter, in Sunan Abi Dawood, in this chapter, Sunan Abi Majah, this chapter, Ibn Majah and Ibn Hibban in this chapter, and Mustadrak in this chapter. And then you collect all of those, and then you go to Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih, or in Sunan Abi Dawood. You go to all those books that book is telling you, and then you collect all those chains, and then now you start to investigate them. Okay, I see there's a shadda here. There must be an anomaly in my primary chain, or that there isn't an anomaly. So once you establish that there isn't an anomaly, then you go to the next one, which is adamul ilal, that there is no defect in it. And now, and as I mentioned previously, that's one condition that I want to go into. Yeah. So when you look at these 5 conditions, اتصال السند, ثبوت العدالة, ثبوت الضبط, عدم الشذوذ, عدم العلل, you can see that 3 out of these 5 conditions are positive, while 2 of them are negative. Which means, what I mean by that is that اتصال السند means that, by positive, I mean that it is a quality that the chain has. ثبوت العدالة is a quality that the narrators have. The narrators have. ثبوت الضبط is the qualities that the narrators have. While عدم الشذوذ means the absence, the non-existence of an anomaly. While عدم العلل is the non-existence of a defect. So 3 of them are positive and 2 of them are negative. Now, going back to this diagram, after having covered all of that, as we mentioned earlier, you can see, you could think of a hadith as the finished product of a factory. So in this case, you can think of the mutun, the contents of a hadith, as the finished product of the factory processes of ulum sanad. So ulum sanad, what you have to first go through this. Once you've gone through this, then you can go into this. And just to briefly look at this section, al-mutun faqat, al-mutun ma'a sharhiha. Al-mutun means the content of the hadith. For example, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, or لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. That's the content of the hadith. That's what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. And then it tells us there's different books for that. There's those that produce the chain, musnada, and then there's those books which collect those ahadith without giving us the chain. So for example, when you look at Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, Imam al-Nawawi does not produce the entire chain of the hadith. He just tells you, عن أمير المؤمنين أبي حفص. He just tells you the Sahabi who narrated the hadith, but he doesn't tell you those after the Sahaba. So that would be an example of a book that collects the contents of a hadith without giving you their entire chain. While there's books that collect a hadith together with their entire chains, like Sahih al-Bukhari. Sahih al-Bukhari, as we saw in the second slide, Imam al-Bukhari produces the entire chain from one person to another person to another person, another person, to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, and then from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and then he gives you the matan. And then this section tells us al-mutun ma'a sharhiha. Now, scholars have written commentaries on these books. They've written commentaries on books where ahadith have been collected in there. A famous one would be Fathul Bari by Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who inshallah in our next class, and I hope it's going to be 2 weeks from now, we're going to mention him, inshallah, one of the greatest scholars of hadith. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani has around a 25-volume commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. So Imam Bukhari wrote Sahih al-Bukhari, and then Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani comes and then he explains the hadith in there. He looks into the asanid of the hadith, and he looks into the content of the hadith, and he fleshes it out. He makes you understand what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meant. And some of these books can be very large, like Fathul Bari, something like 25 volumes. You have Imam al-Nawawi has a commentary, around a 10-volume commentary on Sahih Muslim, and then there's many other commentaries. But now let's go to the quote unquote the factory processes that give rise to the mutun of ahadith, which are ulum al-sanad. Okay, ulum al-sanad. So we looked at al-mustalah. And you can think of al-mustalah al-hadith, this subject, as the gateway to these other subjects. And as we mentioned, when you look at the 5 conditions for an authentic hadith, the first one was ittisal al-sanad. The chain is connected. Now you're going to see over here a science dedicated to just that, as-saqat wal-ittisal. a science dedicated to just the first condition. And then we mentioned the second and the third conditions, which were the integrity of the narrators and the accuracy of the narrators. And we say that we normally go to the same books to find out whether a narrator is and has integrity or is accurate. And we mentioned that we go to the books of Ilm al-Jarh wa Ta'adil, the science where narrators are criticized, are critiqued, or praised. Or we could translate it as the science of narrator evaluation. So for the second and the third conditions for authentic hadith, we go to al-Jarh wa Ta'adil. And al-Jarh wa Ta'adil has sub-branches within it. But I don't think there's any need for us to go into this, because it just tells us the terminologies of this subject, the scholars who specialized in this subject, the principles of this subject, and so on and so forth. Then we mentioned the fourth condition was Adam al-Shudud, the absence of any anomalies. And we said that an anomaly is a relational quality. It is a quality that is born in relation to other chains of narration, which means that we need to collect as many chains of narrations as possible. And that process is called tatabbu' al-turuq, or another word that might be used is al-i'tibar. And the science that assists us in this process of tatabbu' al-turuq, which is quite a modern science. It is a science that has been formulated by some of the ulama in the past century. I think in the 20th century, it's quite new, is takhrij al-hadith. Now here's already another science, takhrij al-hadith. Yeah, takhrij al-hadith. And then, so now we have looked at mustalah السقط والاتصال الجرح والتعديل التخريج الحديث. And then the last condition, which was عدم العلل, the absence of any defects. It has its own subject also, العلل. And it also mentions over here العلم الذي يبحث فيه وجوه الطعن الخفية في الأسانيد والمتون وتعتبر مرحلة متقدمة وتعتبر مرحلة متقدمة في علم الحديث. It says over here that this is considered a advanced level in the studies of ahadith, in hadith studies. Yeah, that's why I was mentioning the idea that only the masters of this science can identify ilal in a hadith, can identify defects in a hadith. And the last science within the ulum al-sanad is manahij al-muhaddithin. Manahij al-muhaddithin means the methodologies of the scholars of hadith. And what is understood from this subject is it's basically, it tells us, for example, Imam al-Bukhari wrote Sahih al-Bukhari. So manahij al-muhaddithin will tell us, why did Imam al-Bukhari write this book? What are the titles that Imam Bukhari gave his book? How did Imam al-Bukhari structure his book? How many chapters are there in his book? How many ahadith are there in his book? What are the conditions that he used in ascertaining the authenticity of a hadith? So it gives us a bird's eye view of these books in here. And that's why it makes sense that the person who made this diagram placed Manahij al-Muhaddithin closer to Ulum al-Matan, because it's like a bridge between Ulum al-Sanad to Ulum al-Matan. It's not something really that, it's not a subject that you study exactly how to find out whether hadith is authentic or not. Yeah. So just to recap, we started off with al-Mustalah, and within Ilm al-Mustalah, we learned the 5 conditions for authentic hadith. And then we saw that there's one subject, there's one science of hadith that focuses solely on the connectedness of a hadith, of a chain of narration, the first condition. And then we saw there's also another subject that focuses on narrator evaluations, which assist us in the second and the third condition for an authentic hadith. Then we looked at takhrij al-hadith, which is a subject that assists us in doing tatabbu' al-turuq, which is necessary in seeing whether a chain of narration has an anomaly within it. And then the last science was al-ilal, which is a science for the elite of this subject, where they can identify hidden defects within the matan or the sanad of a hadith. And then the last one was manahij al-muhaddithin, which is the methodologies employed by the authors of the hadith collections like Imam al-Bukhari, Muslim, at-Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, an-Nasa'i, Abu Dawood, and so on and so forth. So I hope this diagram has become clearer to us. Now I'd like us to move on to a few more slides. Let me just see how many slides are left. So we have around 11 slides left. I hope we'll be done by time, in good time. Okay, now we're going to look at a case study of applying the 5 conditions on a hadith. ما أخرجه البخاري في صحيحه قال Imam al-Bukhari has produced the following hadith in his book. حدثنا عبد الله ابن يوسف قال أخبرنا مالك عن ابن شهاب عن محمد بن جبير بن مطعم عن أبيه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قرأ في المغرب بالطور. فهذا الحديث صحيح لأن okay, so now we're going to look at this hadith whether it's صحيح, but we already know it's sahih because it's from Sahih al-Bukhari. However, we want to now see why did Imam al-Bukhari consider this hadith to be sahih. And the beauty about the subjects of the deen is that later scholars can cross-check the works of previous scholars, and that scholars of the deen don't say things like, they don't pull things out of their thumbs. They don't, nor do they say things out of like a karama or a miracle, where other people cannot see whether it is, like they cannot investigate and cross-examine their conclusions. Later scholars can cross-examine the conclusions of earlier scholars, because earlier scholars had a rigid methodology in coming to the conclusions. And just like that, we who come more than 1,000 years after Imam al-Bukhari can check how Imam al-Bukhari, what Imam al-Bukhari did to conclude that this hadith was authentic. So he says over here that the hadith is sahih. Why? Okay, now let's look at the first condition, that the chain is connected. He says over here, إذ أن كل راو من رواته سمعه من شيخه, that each narrator heard it from his sheikh, or heard it from the person who narrated to him that hadith. So we hear Abdullah bin Yusuf is saying حدثنا. حدثنا means that Imam al-Bukhari is saying حدثنا Abdullah bin Yusuf. So Imam al-Bukhari is saying that we were told, or Abdullah narrated to us, which implies that Imam al-Bukhari had met him physically and heard this particular hadith from him. And then Abdullah says, أخبرنا Malik, that Malik informed him, which implies, and these words have specific meanings. They are very important words. The scholars of hadith don't just throw these words around. These words they imply something important. They imply that they were contemporaries and they met each other and they heard the hadith from them. أخبرنا has a similar meaning to حدثنا. It means that Malik radiallahu anhu narrated or informed Abdullah. And then you start to get the use of the particle or article an. And Malik says from Ibn Shihab and from Muhammad bin Jubayr and from his father, who heard the Prophet ﷺ. So his father was a Sahabi. And then, وأما عنعنة مالك وابن شهاب وابن جبير فمحمولة على الاتصال لأنهم غير مدلسين. Okay, now I would like to mention this briefly, that the word an is a vague word. That when someone says that, for example, if I say from Sheikh Zaid, it's quite vague because it's very different to a word like حدثني or حدثنا. If I say حدثنا Sheikh Zaid, then embedded within the meaning of the word حدثنا is that I met him and I heard that hadith from him. But when I say from Sheikh Zayd, it's vague because I could use the word from and mean that I really didn't meet him. I just heard it from someone else who told me that Sheikh Zayd said this. So I just want to skip this person and go straight to Sheikh Zayd and say from Sheikh Zayd. So because the word an is vague, it could either mean that you met that narrator or you didn't meet that narrator. There's a principle that the scholars have in making sure that the chain is still connected. And the principle over here is that the person who says an Ibn Shihab, like Malik, was not known to be the kind of person who would skip people in his chain of narrations. Like if he said an Ibn Shihab, from Ibn Shihab, he really means that I met him, I heard it from him. But there used to be other people who were known to say an Ibn Shihab, but they didn't meet him. They just heard it from someone else who told them that Ibn Shihab said that. So the principle is that as long as the person who uses the word an is not the kind of person that skips people in his chain of narration, then we'll accept that person's an and consider his part of the narration to be connected. That's what is meant by this principle. فمحمولة على الاتصال لأنهم غير مدلسين. Now let's go and check the second till the fifth conditions. Well, okay, so B and G, Ba and G. So the second and the third conditions, we're going to look at them all at once. وَلِأَنَّ رُوَاتَهُ عُدُولٌ ضَابِطٌ. That all the narrators are men of integrity and accurate narrators. وهذه أوصافهم عند علماء الجرح والتعديل. So the scholars of Jarh wa Ta'adil, the scholars of narrator evaluation, have given the following descriptions of each one of those narrators. Abdullah bin Yusuf, he was described as a thiqatun mutqimun, a reliable narrator and someone who was meticulous in his narration. Malik ibn Anas, who is Imam Malik, one of the founders of the four schools of Islamic law, one of the four madahib. Imam Malik, this is him, Malik ibn Anas. He is described as an imam and a hafid. And hafid means someone who has memorized at minimum 100,000 ahadith with the chains of transmission. And then Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri was described as a faqih hafidun muttafaqun ala jalalatihi wa itqanihi. Lots of praises for him, that he was a jurist, a person who had memorized more than 100,000 ahadith, and someone who everyone has someone who there's a consensus that he was a person with great character and of great accuracy. Then Muhammad bin Jubair was described as a thiqa, a reliable narrator. Then Jubair ibn Mut'im, who was the father. When you go back over here, Muhammad bin Jubair ibn Mut'im, Muhammad bin Jubair, Muhammad the son of Jubair. And he says, an abihi, from his father. So his father is Jubair ibn Mut'im. Jubair ibn Mut'im, he's a Sahabi. And Sahabi is the greatest description that a person can be given within ulum al-hadith. It is the highest level, the highest level of jarh wa ta'adil, of the highest level of ta'adil. And when someone says Sahabi, you automatically believe them to have integrity and to be accurate. And then the fourth condition is, and this is an important point because a belief that distinguishes Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah from the Shia is udul Sahaba. That we believe that all the Sahaba were people of integrity, that they would never lie about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then the fourth condition is غير شاذ إذ لم يعارضه ما هو أقوى منه. That this hadith is not a shadh hadith. It does not have an anomaly because there is no stronger chain of narration or stronger hadith that contradicts it. And then it ends off by saying وَلِأَنَّهُ لَيْسَ فِي عِلَّةٌ مِنَ الْعِلَلِ. and that it does not have any defect. So because now we've ticked all the 5 boxes of the conditions of an authentic hadith, we conclude that this hadith is sahih. And that's what Imam al-Bukhari did. Therefore, he included it within his work, Sahih al-Bukhari. Okay, here's an example of a book of Ilm al-Rijal or Ilm al-Jarh wa-Ta'adil. The book where, this is the kind of book that you would go to know more about the narrators within a chain. This book was written by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and whom I've previously mentioned, and inshallah we'll talk more about him, inshallah 2 weeks from now. One of the great scholars of hadith, and he wrote a work titled Taqrib al-Tahdhib. Now, and I chose this page because I was looking for a particular narrator who is Yahya bin Ma'in bin Aun al-Ghatafani, Mawlahum. So he's giving us the name of the narrator and his tribal affiliation. Abu Zakaria al-Baghdadi. He was also known as Abu Zakaria al-Baghdadi, meaning that he came from Baghdad. Yahya bin Ma'in. Then now this is now his narrative evaluation. He's described as thiqatun, reliable narrator, hafidun, memorizer of up to 100,000 ahadith, mashhurun, imam al-jarh wa ta'adil. He was a imam in the science of jarh wa ta'adil, the science that produces these kinds of books. He was one of the greatest scholars in this science. Min al-ashira, okay, this means something specific, and he's from the 10th generation, and he passed away in the year 233 in the city of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, bil Madinah an-Nabawiyya. Then it continues. So this is an example of checking information about a narrator. If you want to know where they were born, when they passed away, their names, any of their kunyas, and how they were described in terms of the integrity and their accuracy. Okay, and I'd like us to go for a 10-minute break and then come back, inshallah. And I hope that I'll be done with the remaining part of this slide presentation in around 20 to 30 minutes, because now we have around 7 slides left. And I think, and this is quite an important section. In fact, this section lays the foundations for everything else that we've mentioned before. So, and I apologize for extending this class for something like 30 minutes, but if you're able to continue with me until 11:30, and I'll be glad, inshallah. So, hope to see everyone, inshallah, at 11 o'clock. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're back. Okay. This is going to be the final lapse for our presentation today, inshallah. Okay. So one major idea that we've covered so far is the five concepts, the five conditions for an authentic hadith. Now, from this point onwards, I would like us to think about the second and the third conditions a bit more, questioning the second and third conditions. Why do we tend to have confidence in the veracity of a report from an accurate and trustworthy narrator? And the reason why I've limited our investigations, our further investigations, to the second and the third conditions, because the other conditions in some way connect to the second and the third conditions. The second condition being integrity, and the third condition being on accuracy. Because for the first condition of the chain being connected, the problem with a disconnected chain is that there has to be someone within the chain that hasn't been mentioned. So that hasn't been mentioned in the chain. So the person who's narrating the hadith and producing this chain of narration, he says that I heard this from this person, from this person, from this person. But if there's a gap in the chain, it means that he did not meet the person that he's narrating from. So that means that he must have heard that hadith from someone else, who maybe heard from someone else, maybe who heard from someone else, who heard from the second person in the chain. So now, because there's a possibility of one or more people who have been omitted from the chain, and we do not know the integrity nor the accuracy, we reject that hadith or that report. So the problem with the disconnected chain is that we don't know the second and the third conditions of those people who have been omitted from the chain. Again, when you go to shudud and ilal, they all go back to, like an accuracy. That despite the narrators being accurate and trustworthy, because maybe one of them might have worded a hadith in a particular way, maybe not remember it perfectly, and he contradicts a larger group of narrators, we now see this hadith as da'if. So it goes back to being an accurate narrator, both for ilal and shudud. So that's why you could see these two conditions, the second and the third conditions, as the mother and father of the rest of the conditions. So now let's look into these two conditions. One of our lecturers at Medina Institute, who's Dr. Bat, who's been teaching us the module on research methodology since the beginning of this year, once said something very interesting. He mentioned the following statement. He said that the whole science of hadith is epistemology. And this statement really blew me away. It's a very comprehensive statement. And to understand what this statement means, let's look into epistemology. What is epistemology? Epistemology. Epistemology is an English word that comes from the Greek word episteme. And the word episteme means knowledge. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy, one of the most fundamental branches of philosophy that looks at how we know what we know. Epistemologists look at the sources of knowledge and the scope of our knowledge. What can we know? And how do we know what we know? When you look at other subjects, if you look at something like chemistry looks at elements and compounds. When you look at ulum al-hadith, it's looking at ahadith. When you're looking at fiqh, it's looking at human actions and the legal rulings from the Quran and Sunnah on those human actions. So these subjects all have a specific kind of knowledge that they're looking at. But epistemology takes a step back and it now looks at the general idea of knowledge. We're not looking at the knowledge of living beings. We're not looking at the knowledge of human actions, but we're looking at the knowledge of knowledge. We want to get some knowledge about knowledge. It's very general. And because of this general nature of this subject, it's one of the most fundamental sciences, or one of the most fundamental fields of study in the whole of human knowledge. Some of the Arabic terms that are used for epistemology are asbabul ilm. Imam al-Nasafi, in his seminal work in Aqidah titled Al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya, early on in that text, he uses the word asbabul ilm. Another phrase is madarikul yaqeen. Madarikul yaqeen was used by Hujjatul Islam al-Ghazali. He uses this term madarikul yaqeen. For example, I once came across Imam al-Ghazali using this phrase in Al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad, which is one of his main works in Aqidah. Another phrase is Nadhariyatul Ma'rifah. And I believe this is a recent Arabic term for epistemology. Because in English, epistemology is also described as the theory of knowledge, while Nadhariyatul Ma'rifah is a translation of the word theory of knowledge into Arabic. Because Nadhariya means theory, Al-Ma'rifah means knowledge. So the theory of knowledge, Nadhariyatul Ma'rifah. And then the last term that might be used within Arabic literature is a transliteration of the word epistemology itself, Al-Epistemologia. Yeah, but the classical terms are Asbabul Ilm, Madarikul Yaqeen, and the contemporary terms are Nadhariyatul Ma'rifah and Al-Epistemologia. Okay. So as we've mentioned, epistemology looks at the sources of knowledge. And we are taught within the deen that there are three primary sources of knowledge: the senses, the intellect, and testimony/reports. If you were to look at the things that you know, you would see that they all go back to these three sources, or most of it goes back to these three sources. If I were to ask you, how does a tree look? And if you're able to answer this question, you're able to answer this question because you've seen a tree before. So that's your senses. If I were to ask you, is a part greater than its whole? You would say no. And the reason why you'd say no is because you're applying your intellect in finding the answer to such a question. You know a priori, you know that it is self-evident that the whole of a thing is greater than its part, than its parts. While if I were to ask you, for how many years did Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu rule the Khilafah? And if you say 10 years, you'll be correct because of, and you would have gotten that knowledge from reports about the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. And in fact, a lot of what we know really comes from reports or testimonies, or in other words, a lot of what we know comes from other people telling us about it. Yeah. And now when you look at each one of these senses, they have methods in making sure that the kind of knowledge that is based on these senses is correct and certain. And an example for the senses would be the scientific method. You know, that science, in the deen, we have this idea of al-hukm al-adi. Al-hukm al-adi is a judgment about the cause of nature. That when a particular event occurs in nature, then another event happens after it. For example, if it is sunny in one area, it would make the air in that area hot, and then the air will rise up. So you can see, okay, this hot air, after hot air, air rises up. After the air rises up, there's an area of low pressure in that area, and then that brings about the wind. Because there's low pressure here, the air moves from other areas to fill in that void, in that area of low pressure. Then that gives rise to wind. So science tells us about what happens in nature, about natural phenomena. And the scientific method ensures that by being repetitive in our experiments, that the information and the judgments that we deduce from our senses produce knowledge that is close to certainty. And then when it comes to the intellect, logic, or also known as mantiq within the deen, ensures that the conclusions that are produced by the intellect are sound and valid. Now, when it comes to testimony, especially reports about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because there's reports can be about anything. Like I can ask someone, okay, what did you eat for lunch yesterday? And his answer would be his report of what he ate for yesterday, at lunch for yesterday. So reports can be about many things. But now since we're talking about ulum al-hadith, we're specifically focusing on the reports about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're not talking about reports about the Roman Empire. We're not talking about reports about, you know, about other things. We're just talking about reports about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is the methodology? What is the method that ensures that these reports produce knowledge, produce certainty? Just as logic assists the intellect in producing knowledge, and just as a scientific method assists us in producing sound judgments from the senses. What is that for testimony about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It will be ulum al-hadith. Ulum al-hadith plays the role, this role, just as logic plays a particular regulatory and verifying role for the intellect. Ulum al-hadith does that for reports about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But how? How does ulum al-hadith do that? To answer the question, how does ulum al-hadith do that, we'll have to turn our attention to usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is one of the sciences of the deen. And I found a particular excerpt in a work written by a contemporary scholar called or known as Sheikh Saeed Fawda. And Sheikh Saeed Fawda is an incredible contemporary scholar in Aqidah, in Islamic theology, and in Usul al-Fiqh. And he writes over here, he tells us in 2 pages how we can be certain about reports. Yes. Again, how reports produce knowledge. He says over here, إمكانية استفادة العلم من الخبر. The possibility of deducing knowledge from reports, how that can be possible. And I'd like to read these 2 pages, inshallah. And then this slide summarizes those 2 pages. However, I would like us to read these 2 pages to accustom our eyes to works written in Arabic or to Arabic texts, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وهذا المعنى مهم جدا للأصول لأن موضوع بحثه يفرض عليه أن يدلل على أن الأدلة الإجمالية التي يقرر أنها قواعد للفقه يمكن أن يستفاد منها العلم أصلا أو لا. وسوف نشير هنا إلى الأدلة الدالة على إفادة الخبر للعلم. So now that's his introduction. And he goes on by saying, علم من مفهوم الخبر أنه راجع إلى سماع أمر من إنسان أو مخبر. He defines to us what a report is. That a report is hearing something, hearing a statement from another person. وهذا المخبر يدعي أن ما يقوله فهو صدق ومطابق للواقع. Now this person, this reporter, this informer of a report wants us to believe that what he's saying is true. فها هنا ثلاثة جهات المخبر والسامع والخبر. And this is an important point, that when you look at reports or testimonies, you can see 3 important components. You have the informer, you have the report itself, and you have the informed. Those are the 3 components within testimony: the informer, the informed, and the report itself that moves from the informer to the informed. فالسامع لا يمكن أن يكون هو السبب في كون الخبر صحيحا، لأنه عبارة عن منفعل به، أي إن أثر الخبر والمقصود منه يظهر في السامع، ومعلوم أن هذه هي نتيجة الخبر، والنتيجة لا يمكن أن تكون هي سببا لما نتجت هي عنه، فلا بد أن تكون الخصائص المسببة للصدق والكذب كامنة في المخبر، فيستحيل أن تكون ذات الخبر محل البحث في الحقيقة، إنما هو ما يصل إليك من معاني محمولة بأصوات تستقبلها في أذنك. ونحن نعلم أن مجرد صوت من حيث هو صوت لا يدل على أكثر من المصوت، أي الصوت من حيث هو لا يدل إلا على الذي صدر عنه من حيث إنه موجود، ولكن ليست هذه المعلومات هي المأمول الحصول عليها من مجرد ما نطلق عليه أنه خبر، بل المطلوب أن هذه الأصوات التي هي كلمات معينة دالة بالوضع لا بالطبع على معان، هل مجرد كونها كذلك كاف في استفادة العلم منها، أي هل مجرد كونها صوتا أتاك من غيرك هل يفيد ذلك العلم؟ لا شك أن هذا ليس كافيا. إذا لا يبقى عندنا إلا الذي صدر منه الخبر، وهو الإنسان أو المخبر الفاعل بالإرادة المتكلم بالقصد. Okay, and I'll explain what he says in a short while, inshallah. Then he goes on to say, فهل مجرد كونه متكلما هو السبب الكافي لإفادة العلم من خبره؟ لا شك أن هذا ليس كافيا، وذلك لوجود كثير من الكاذبين وغيرهم ممن لا نستفيد من خبرهم علما، والحاصل أن هناك أمرا وراء ذلك هو السبب في إفادة الصدق لخبر المخبر، وهذا المفهوم قد بينا نحن في غير هذا الموضع كيف يجب أن يكون صفة لنفس المخبر، وهذه الصفة هي كون ثقة يعني important concept، ويندرج فيه كونه صادقا بما تحتويه هذه الصفة من معان كثيرة كما هو مبين في علم أصول الحديث، فكون ثقة هو الأساس في كون خبر المخبر مفيدا للعلم أو للنظر للظن، ولا شك أن هذا المفهوم له حقيقته في الخارج، وليس هو عبارة عن توهم نفساني أو واصطلاح فني، والقصد المقصود هنا هو موافقة النسبة الكلامية للنسبة الذهنية. And we're going to cover this concept soon. ولا شك أن هذا ليس كافيا في الحصول على العلم الذي هو موافقة النسبة لما في الخارج، لأن الصادق بالمفهوم السابق قد ينسى وقد يفهم المعنى على غير المراد، وقد يسمع جزءا ولا يسمع الجزء الآخر من الكلام إلى غير ذلك من الاحتمالات. لهذا لازم العلماء البحث عن مفهوم أعم من الصدق السابق، وهو مفهوم الثقة الذي لا ينسى ولا يكذب، ويفهم ما يسمع إلى غير ذلك من مقدمات مؤثرة في إفادة الخبر الصدقي. فوجدوا أن الواحد إذا أخبرنا بخبر معين ثم أخبرنا بهذا الخبر غيره اطمأنت نفوسنا إلى صدق الخبر زيادة اطمئنان، فعدد المخبرين جهة مؤثرة في كون الخبر مفيدا، بحيث إنهم إذا وصلوا إلى عدد وكيفية ما آمنت النفس منهم الكذب والغلط. وتوجد غير هذه الجهات المذكورة هنا تأثر في إفادة الخبر الصدق كما ذكره العلماء في علم أصول الحديث. فهذه مقدمة عن الأخبار لائقة بعلم الأصول تنبه الإنسان إلى النواحي التي يهتم بها الأصول، والمقام ليس مقام تفصيل. Okay, that brings us to the end of this excerpt. Okay, now Sheikh Saeed Fawda takes us to a journey. And the starting point of the journey is to tell us the three components of a report. There's the informer, there's the report, and there's the recipient of the report. And he starts off by asking the question, where can we find the truth of this report? Because we want to know whether this report is true. And as we mentioned earlier, we can't time travel to confirm whether that report is true. So with what we have, how can we tell that this report is true? So the question is, where does the cause of the truth value of that report lie? He starts off by saying, okay, let's see whether it lies in the recipient of the report. As the recipient of the report, as the informed, does me just hearing the report make the report truthful? Of course not. The truth value of the report cannot stem from me. It cannot come from me as the recipient. So that eliminates me. That's why I put as-sami' in red. Okay, now we move to the khabar. The khabar, the report is basically sounds that are being produced by the informer that have meanings. Or if it's something written, it's written letters that have meanings. Now there are two things there, letters and sounds and meanings. Letters and sounds in and of themselves cannot indicate to us the truth value of the report. And Sheikh Sa'id Fawda tells us that the most that we can get from letters, from the production of letters and sounds, is the existence of an informer. So for example, right now I'm in this room. If I hear sounds from another room, I'll automatically conclude that there must be someone in that room. I will affirm the existence of the producer of those sounds. So sounds and letters at the most tell us that the producer of those sounds and letters exists, but it doesn't tell us whether that report is true in and of itself. And then again, when you look at the meaning of the khabar, the meaning of the report, the meaning itself cannot indicate to us whether it's true or false. So if I were to ask someone, what did you have for lunch yesterday? And he tells me that he had some biryani. Just him telling me that, me understanding what he's saying, understanding the meanings of his report, will not indicate to me whether that report is true or false. He might have lied to me, although I understood the meanings of his report. So now that eliminates the khabar being the source of the truth value of itself. And it takes us to the last component of a report, the mukhbir. And Sheikh Sa'id Fawda tells us that we can only have confidence in a report after looking at the qualities that the person who's telling you that report has. And that's the best that we can do. Unfortunately, we cannot time travel and confirm whether that report is true. All that we have in terms of tools is investigating the qualities that the informer has. And there are two qualities that are important. The first quality that the informer should have is that what he is saying with his words must align with what is in his mind. And nisbatul kalamiyya must be in line with nisbatul dhihniyya. The word kalam means speech, the word dhihn means mind. So the thing that he says must mirror the statement in his mind that he truly believes. And when there's a misalignment of what someone believes with what someone says, that's when they're lying. To lie is to know the truth, but to convey other than that to someone else. There's a misalignment in nisbatul kalamiyya with nisbatul dhihniyya. So someone who makes sure that what he says aligns with what is in his mind is someone who has truthfulness. But someone who's truthful is not enough for us to have confidence in the report. Because maybe they've gotten a bit old and maybe or maybe they have some memory issues, and they genuinely think what they're telling you is true, but because of some distortion in their memories, it's not in line with reality. And that's why this second element is important, that what is in his mind and nisbah to dhihniya, the connection that exists in his mind in terms of statements, is in line with the reality, with what really was. And that is what dabt is, accuracy. An accurate narrator is someone that when he hears a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, that he registers it perfectly in his mind. And later on, whether it's 10 years later, when he narrates that hadith, he narrates it as he had registered it in his mind 10 years ago when he heard it from Rasulullah ﷺ. In other words, that he has a good memory. That when he wants to retrieve information from his memory, that information that he's retrieving from his memory is a carbon copy of the impression that was formed on his memory the first time when he had that experience. For example, hearing a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And once these two qualities are in line, truthfulness and accuracy, then we have a thiqah, then we have a relied upon narrator. And these are the epistemological grounds upon which the quality of thubutul adala and thubutul dabt come from. This is where they come from. Yeah. Now this brings us, alhamdulillah, to the very end of our presentation, which is, and I would like us to piece everything together. And there are three major ideas that I've shared with everyone today. And this is how we can piece them together. Now, working backwards in terms of the chronological order of my slides, we looked at the epistemological foundations of ulum al-hadith and the fact that ulum al-hadith is about reports, right? And a report has an informer, a recipient, and the report itself. And we saw that the cause of the truth value of a report cannot lie in the recipient, nor can it lie in the report itself. But the best that we can do in terms of deciphering the truth value of a statement or of a report is to look at the qualities that the informer possesses. And we saw that the informer must have things being in line within himself, that what he says is in line with what is in his mind, that what he truly believes in his mind, and that is being truthful. That is truthfulness, as-sidq. And that what is in his mind is in conformity or corresponds with what really happened, and that's reality. And that's the quality of being accurate, dabt, of having a good memory. And once we saw those two qualities, dabt and accuracy, we see that we now see where thubutul adala and thubutul dabt, those two conditions come from. And from those two conditions, we can build from them to construct all the 5 conditions, the 5 conditions for an authentic hadith. And once we know the 5 conditions for an authentic hadith and apply them on a hadith, we can, at the end of the day, have confidence in a hadith, that we can have confidence in the isnad tradition. We can have confidence in the veracity of a hadith found in the books of a hadith. And alhamdulillah, that brings us to the end of our first day. And I hope, inshallah, that we can have a second class 2 weeks from now. And I hope that nothing will pop up on that day, because you never know, sometimes an event might be postponed to that day. So I hope something like that doesn't happen so that we can have the second day. And just to give you a preview of what I would like us to cover, it will be mostly about the history and the development of a hadith, or of ulum al-hadith. So you'll be looking at many names of scholars and many titles of books, those kinds of things. And there'll be many photos of books, you know, of the different subjects within ulum al-hadith. So that's my plan for the class that we'll have 2 weeks from now. But for today, it was mostly about having a firm conceptual grounding for our studies of Hadith. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. And shukran for your attention. If you have any questions or if you have any comments that would enrich our discussion, feel free to share. And in fact, if you even have any refutations, I would love to hear them, inshallah. Shukran. Ameen, Ameen, shukran, Auntie Siham. Okay, so that brings us, alhamdulillah, to the end. I'll just end the live stream.